If you own an aquarium, at some point you're going to be dealing with hair algae. In this video, I'm going to be discussing whether you should actually worry about hair algae, how my tanks are dealing with it, and how I'm dealing with it as I progress through my aquarium cycle. Here we have some delicious hair algae. As you can see, this rock is starting to get covered in this green stuff. In fact, this entire tank is starting to get a little bit of a hair algae problem. Now this is a totally normal thing to happen in a maturing aquarium. What sparked this hair algae bloom off though was finishing my diatom bloom phase of cycling. All my diatoms just disappeared overnight and I was extremely chuffed by this. I managed to get rid of my diatoms by starving them out essentially. I didn't add any nutrients to my system for a good 2 months, and then one day overnight the diatoms disappeared. At that point I did a water test and I had no nitrates and no phosphates, and normally that would be an excellent thing in a reef tank. However, as you can see, I like to keep macroalgae, and these do require nutrients to survive. So the first thing I did was add some nitrate and phosphate, which would regularly be an okay thing to do. The one issue was there wasn't enough macroalgae in this system to soak all that nutrient up fast enough, and this is the result. We have hair algae. As you can see on this piece of macroalgae, hair algae is growing on it. This is an issue. You can see in the back here as well, we have got hair algae stifling this macroalgae too. This is a very common occurrence in reef tanks, especially with macroalgae, because hair algae loves to grow on macroalgae. I've done a little bit of digging as to why this is, and it's because, as far as I can see, macroalgae is quite leaky and releases quite a lot of its products from photosynthesis, all the sugars and things, through its own cell walls and into the water column. And as you can see, the hair algae, I'm assuming, feeds off this leakiness, getting some free sugars and so on for no effort. But the question at the start of the video was, should you worry about hair algae in your reef tank? And the answer to that is sort of yes. I say sort of because most of the time hair algae will just go away on its own. But that is only if you realise the cause of the algae itself. A lot of the time people will just carry on doing the same bad habits and not address the issue, and the hair algae will get out of control. We've all seen these tanks, which is just an entire turf of hair algae and nothing else in the aquarium. You can see here some Botrocladia that I moved out of that tank, and it is absolutely covered in hair algae. And this is a problem, and this is what I'm worried about. I'm not so much worried about the hair algae itself. I'm worried about the fact that it's going to stifle my macroalgae, and I'm going to be relying on the macroalgae to actually outcompete the hair algae. And obviously, if the hair algae is growing all over the macroalgae, this presents a little problem. So how am I going to go about fixing this issue? Well, initially you would think the first thing to do would be to stop adding the nitrates and phosphates, and this is where you would then go wrong. As I've said earlier in the video, nitrates and phosphates are required by macroalgae, and if I just jump to the conclusion of adding NOPOX or adding things that remove the phosphates and the nitrates, I'm going to be back to square one. My macroalgae won't grow, and then as soon as I add the nitrates and phosphates again to get the macroalgae to grow, I'll have another hair algae bloom. So what have I done to rectify the situation, or at least attempt to rectify the situation? Well, I had a little bit of a hair algae bloom in this system as well, for the same reason actually, because they were both cycling at the same time, so they've kind of duplicated each other. You can see it at the back there on this bit of Botrocladia, and Botrocladia does seem to be one of the worst affected by hair algae. So the first thing I've done is add more cleanup crew. This is a very sensible thing to do. Here you can see lots of mollies, and they help to some extent. They don't tend to eat hair algae in any great amount, but they do help a little bit. I've also added more hermit crabs. You can see there's also a bit of cyano in here now. More hermits, and these ones are blue leg hermits because they tend to be the best for going onto macroalgae. Also, what I've been doing on a daily basis is getting my hand into the macroalgae and giving it a good shake. Now, this doesn't actually remove the hair algae, but what it does do is it removes detritus that settles onto the macroalgae. And detritus buildup is a lot of the time the cause of the hair algae, because the detritus gives the hair algae something to grow onto. And I found that if you remove the detritus, it's the dirt and the dust that can stick to macroalgae, a lot of the time you won't get hair algae at all. Another thing I've been doing is scrubbing my rocks. Now, lots of people will say that this isn't something that works, but I would like to say to them that it does work. The reason being, you can see here on an area of rock that I've scrubbed more than once, you know, I've been doing it every day. Coralline algae then has the ability to grow. If you leave it in this sort of state, then the light and everything won't get to the rock surface and the coralline can't grow. So scrubbing your rock is very important. I've been using one of these brushes. It's for engines and things, for cleaning dirt and stuff of that. It's not a metal brush, it's a plastic one, and I found these to be perfect for this job. Now, as I said at the start of the video, hair algae, cyanobacteria, diatoms and things, they tend to only really appear in more fresh tanks, ones that haven't matured. And this is because in a mature tank, the bacteria, the microfauna and so on will naturally, or tend to naturally, outcompete the hair algae, especially when you've got macroalgae as well. There doesn't tend to be lots of nutrients left over for the hair algae. This tank is unbalanced, and that's the reason why I've got hair algae. It's unbalanced because it went from 0 nitrates and 0 phosphates all the way up to like 10 nitrates and 0.5 phosphates. And because that microfauna wasn't there, the hair algae grew. And I'm aware of the situation and why this happened. The reason I dosed straight away was partially a panic reaction because I wanted the macroalgae to grow. And to be fair, since I've dosed it, the macroalgae has started to grow. There were no new growth tips for the last, say, month. And then as soon as I've dosed it, you can see here on this Gracilaria mammillaris, we have got growth. Although there is hair algae, there's a little bit of light burn, there is growth. And that is a direct response to the nutrients. So the macroalgae needed the nutrients. I had to dose it. But my population of macroalgae wasn't high enough to deal with the amount of nutrients that I put in there. So the result is the hair algae. So moving forward, all I really have to do now is just find the right balance of nutrients. Don't dose so much, but make sure that my levels of nitrates and phosphates are accessible. This blue octose is growing. It's doubled in size in the last week. So that's telling me that I'm on the right track. And as soon as all the macroalgae start to flourish and grow, then this hair algae will disappear. It's just a matter of time. So to answer my original question of should you worry about hair algae, really you shouldn't, but you should be aware of what's causing it. And I think this is the big message that most people kind of don't understand. It's not something you need to do a knee-jerk reaction to. You just need to manage it. It does take time and it does take work, but so long as you are aware of what your issue is, you can quite easily get rid of your hair algae, but it will take a month or two until your tank matures. So thanks for watching. I hope this video has been entertaining and also useful for your fight against hair algae. If you have enjoyed it, please remember to leave a like and also subscribe, and thank you to my channel members. Once again, thanks for watching and happy fish keeping.